G'day, I'm Ray Tomes from New Zealand. This is step 2 of making the universe. You should watch step 1 first if you haven't already seen it. In this step I'm going to continue from the basis of the previous step, that the universe behaves as if it were one very large hunk of a very high tensile medium that can support vibrations. And I'm going to show a bit about some vibrations that happen in the real world, building towards the step 3, where I will show you how this actually causes all the things in the universe to come into existence. Hundreds of years ago, a scientist by the name of Chladni discovered that if you vibrate a solid object like a piece of metal plate that you've put some other material onto, then it makes amazing patterns on it, and you can see in these patterns the nature of the vibrations that are forming within the material. Later on, this was built onto by Hans Jenny, who about 50 years ago studied the vibrations in dust-like mediums and also in fluids. The fluid ones are particularly interesting, but the dust ones also show fascinating things. He found cases where you could get vibrations that made things that actually looked like animals, and did all sorts of interesting movements of parts beyond what one might expect from just putting a couple of simple vibrations into something. And we can see that this whole area, human intuition, just doesn't work at explaining what sort of things are going to happen in this system. So we actually have to study what these systems do to get a better idea of what's going on, to see why vibration is the most fundamental thing in the universe. This is the equipment that I used in my experiment. I took a computer speaker and turned it on its side and mounted some little plastic arrangements on it with a dish full of shallow water. And I played sounds through the speaker from the computer to see what would happen. This way I could control the frequencies that I was playing and the volume and see what happened. When I played a low volume sound of a particular frequency, of any frequency, a series of circular patterns appeared in the water. I had originally discovered these by banging around with a teacup, but I got squirted in the eye by the concentration of energy that arrived in the middle, and decided cold water would be a better thing than hot tea. When the volume was increased a little bit, the pattern broke from having just a single series of concentric circles to having one circle in the middle with 6 others around it and a series of spokes radiating from it. When I increased it a bit further, it broke into a much more interesting pattern with a lot of dynamics happening. And as I reduced the volume, it changed suddenly back through these steps again. There was no way to get something in between. Anyway, this is what it looks like when it's running. This is running at 1/4 speed, and you can see the little patterns of circles being more or less stable, but there's a dynamic to them. They move around. This is a still frame now taken from video showing the arrangements of the pattern, and you can see the spokes radiating out, particularly the one up to the left and the one coming downwards, but you can see some other spokes radiating out, and the wavelengths of these are caused by the particular frequency being played in the water. But you can also see a series, particularly 4 of them in the middle, of little circular patterns with a dot in the middle and a circle around them, and these are arranged in a square pattern which I've labelled now A, B, C, D. But you can see some other centres that are labelled X, Y, Z, I should say for Americans, or Z as we say here, and some other centres around also. These centres are at distances from each other which are exact multiples of half the wavelength. If you have a red and a blue centre, then those ones there are all 1.5 wavelengths away from each other, and you can see the pattern of waves that I've shown by the red and blue circles. Again, the red centres are exactly 1 wavelength from each other, or 4, or the 2 blues are 2 from each other. In addition to these distances that they maintain, there are patterns in 8 different directions. There's a pattern of waves that goes through the blue and red centres, and is what's responsible for these ladder-like patterns that are heading out as spokes in all different directions. Of course, the real world's a bit more complicated than this little circular dish. We don't know whether it has a circular boundary or not. That doesn't really matter. But the thing is, it is three-dimensional, not two-dimensional, so the wave structures are likely to be rather more complicated than this. However, we can understand that in a universe full of vibration, that centers can exist which have particle-like properties, which will have different phases that can account for the different charges of different particles, but that these are standing waves, and that the energy coming into each one and the energy going out of each one is the same energy that passes through the center as the concentric waves converge on the spot and then go out, and that the arrangement of all of these different ones is supporting the phases of the waves of all other particles. Every particle in the universe is being constantly recreated by the energy of all other particles. And this is something which is not really understood by physicists, and I think it's a very important point. If we want to understand how the universe works, we do need to say that nature actually works like this. One other thing that's not immediately obvious from the diagrams I did there is that the central wave has a slightly bigger wavelength than the outer ones. And this is because as the wave converges in the center, there's a lot more energy at that point, and also the amplitude of the wave goes up and down more. And water in a dish like this is the non-linear medium. And that simply means that the wave speed is not constant at all times. It does depend on the depth. And in the real world, in the universe, the medium that the universe is made of, it has the same property that where the energy gets concentrated at the center of a wave, the speed of light will be altered. That's because the tension of the ether is changing at that point. And by that change, it means that the central waves are slightly larger than others. This leads to interesting situations, and the whole formation of particle properties that comes about, all the different properties of particles that they have, such as spin and isospin and things, and all of these things that physicists have come up with, I think can all be explained by the different nature of the types of vibration you can get, particularly when you use a tensile medium rather than I did here, a fluid medium. Because in a tensile medium you can have the vibrations crossways to the direction of travel of the waves, and this leads to very interesting configurations of spin and polarity within each particle. One other consequence of this nonlinearity is that it means that every individual wave is not 100% stable. Every wave, in fact, is always losing energy, because the nonlinearity means that the wave shape is always changing, and this energy loss goes to harmonics of the wave, and we see this in a particular example of this is when a wave is breaking near the seashore. A wave that's travelled with a more or less sine-shaped wave, when it arrives near the seashore and the shore and the water gets less deep, the tops of the waves now travel faster than the bottoms of the waves, and they overtake them and the wave breaks. And this complicated thing that happens when the wave breaks is something akin to what's going on near the centers of particles, where a more complicated thing goes on and energy is lost to harmonics, and other frequencies are given off or created within that particle. And this is how the whole universe arises from this nonlinearity, and this is what will be dealt with in part 3.